overall, very pleased with the process on the Senate side for negotiating the budget.
Governor Napolitano is satisfied so far with the job the legislature has done this session, but what about our panel? Let's find out. And Kirsten, this is going to get you riled up. I pulled a soundbite from Representative Russell Pierce, who said this, quote, "I can't express how disappointed I am," end quote. He was referring to this budget with very few tax cuts. Now, we should probably remind him that last year's budget had $600 million in tax cuts.
I think what Mr. Pierce is probably most disappointed about is that he didn't have a seat at the table. But that was the choice of his and his leadership. They chose not to participate in the Senate negotiations at the beginning of session. Everyone else was represented. They weren't. That's their fault.
Darcy, jump in here.
Well, I think there's some, let me start with the good news with this budget.
Okay.
The good news with this budget is that spending is only going up about 4%. It's a lot less than it has been for the past 4 years. Spending has increased faster under the Napolitano administration than it has in any time since the 1980s. So this is good. It's probably because revenue's not coming in strong. But anyway, there's a little bit of control. The bad news is, though, that there was no education reform, no tax reform, no entitlement reform, and that this budget is replete with earmarks. You know, in Washington, where they had the bridge to nowhere, now in Yuma, taxpayers are footing the bill for $1 million welcome center. Very much the same thing. And so, and there was entitlement reform that needed to happen. The health care insurance program we have in the state that was for poor who really can't help themselves was expanded. Now taxpayers are now paying for over half of the babies born in this state. It won't be long before Paris Hilton qualifies for a subsidy now under the state health insurance program.
Well, we can solve that by instituting universal health care.
So we need some reform. We need some serious reform. And so in a lot of ways, this was really a do-nothing session.
You're shaking your head.
You know what's real interesting? You even bought the argument there was only, a 4% increase. If you actually look at ongoing spending, we are up $1 billion program for program over last year. Now, obviously, from Kirsten's perspective, that's good in terms of the more programs. From Darcy's perspective, oh my God, we didn't give more money for quote-unquote education reform, i.e., vouchers for private and parochial schools. But the fact is that we're going to have to decide at some point what we want to be as a state. If we are growing as fast as we're growing, at 3 to 4% a year, and if we have to decide what services do we want to provide. We haven't had that grand discussion here in Arizona of what we want. Do we want universal health care, or do we want some minimal care like we had prior to 1982 when the counties were responsible? Things like this. We haven't had that discussion. We need to have that discussion and then decide how do we finance it.
I have to agree with Howie, which is a big shocker, I know. But he's right. We do need to have the discussion. Now, we at this table, and probably the other legislators in our state, are going to have different ideas about what that solution needs to be. But we do need to have the discussion. And that's, I think, one of the critical things that's missing. We as legislators are elected to be stewards of our communities, and we're not acting as such. We're not taking responsible action to look at the long-term plans for our state and investing in things like we make these short-term investments, even things like the Arizona Science Foundation and the Biomedical School, which I support. Are we doing that in a long-term, broad-based manner, or are we just trying to put some money in certain areas?
You know what, let me follow you there, because my very next question, I wanted to tick off a couple of things in the education realm. Teachers are getting $46 million in pay raises, $25 million for the downtown medical school, and also $100 million for that Arizona Science Foundation. So here is my question. Is that enough to just keep up, just to stay competitive, or is that enough money so where we can look 5 and 10 years down the road?
Not even to keep us competitive.
Really?
We need more.
Well, let's put some facts on the table here. There is not a single bit of evidence that putting money into the Science Foundation is going to do anything for the Arizona economy. Now, if you want to spend money on that, if you want...
Companies come in here and they say, wait a minute, if you guys have this base, we're going to invest, and we're going to bring in good jobs.
Companies love to say that because it's called corporate welfare, and it enriches them. So you have to think about this. What helps an economy is low tax rates, and unfortunately, this legislature really missed the boat on this. There were corporate tax cuts on the table, which would have helped to keep us regionally competitive. Instead, Arizona continues to have one of the highest corporate tax rates in the western United States. Now, if we were to lower that, that would attract businesses of all kinds.
Oh, come on.
Rather than just the ones that are favored.
The problem with Darcy.
No, we don't want to have a beat up on Darcy party here.
But here's the problem with Darcy and her friends. But we constantly hear if we lower taxes, we will bring in more money. We have cut the individual income tax rate in this state by almost half. It's going back into the Simon administration, and somehow it's supposed to grow our way out. Using your line of thinking, we ought to cut all taxes to zero, and we'll have lots of money. There's a point of diminishing return in there, Darcy.
Anarchy.
Yes.
The truth is this, is that we need to have a responsible tax base, and there are many of us who agree with lowering the corporate tax rate, and we have done so in the past session, and those tax cuts will continue for the future. But we also need to make targeted, very specific, and mindful investments in the future of Arizona's economy. And one of those things to do is to invest in biotech, to invest in science, to invest in education.
Kirsten, there is
building blocks for our
absolutely
economy.
no evidence whatsoever that spending on science is good for the economy. That is the reality. Now,
Well, Darcy,
Wait a minute, so TGen sitting downtown,
yes,
TGen by itself, you would rather be in Silicon Valley or someplace on the East Coast?
If you want to have that because you think it's good for society to be spending money on research and so forth, that's great. But the OECD has studied this internationally, worldwide, and there is no relationship between the amount of spending on this from the public side and economic growth. So the discussion should be about whether you think that that is just generally good to have science or not. But let's be honest about what really moves the economy, because that's not going to do it.
All right, I got to be honest. Hang on. I got to be honest. I got to hit a commercial break. So we're going to talk dollars and cents in another way when we come back, and that is we need to talk about electricity rates. They are on the rise again. Is it justified, though? The panel will obviously square off on that when we come right back. APS raises rates yet again. The company has raised them 13% in 2 years. So what's going on? Let's find out from our panel. Here's what I want to know from you folks. All right, is this company lacking the proper management at the top to keep up with growth, or is the Valley so drunk on growth that no power company can keep up?
Well, I would say that it's neither. I think that the problem here is that even after the reforms that were attempted in the 90s, that we still have a board of 5 people setting a monopolistic price on utility rates. And if this were happening, for instance, with your cell phone, instead of, you would go to Singular or Verizon or AT&T, and you would switch until the rates came down. I mean, especially if they said they're going to go up 20%.
Like you do when you're buying gas.
We have a situation right now where you've got 5 people setting rates of utility rates for the entire state of Arizona. So what we need is a little bit of...
what part of monopoly
Do I hear monopoly coming from this other side of the table?
Competition in the system.
Well, exactly. How do you do that? This is not like we have a system that theoretically you can't have 5 companies all stringing wire to your house. We do have a system that if you're a large utility user, you can buy your electrons from one place, have them delivered by somebody else. For you, for me, it's APS, it's SRP, it's Tucson Electric, it's Silver Springs Valley. We don't have a choice. So what choice do we have other than to have utility regulators looking at it? Give me a break.
Well, that's actually not true. I mean, Vernon Smith, who is a Nobel economist on this, has talked a lot about how you can deregulate this industry to bring in more competition. It's not a perfect industry because there are some issues with lines, but we have those same things with cable. We have those same things with telephones. And so this is an industry where we need to be looking into that so that we really can keep up with growth and so that people are not taxed unfairly if a company is mismanaging.
Right. I think that we really have to look at the 2 things that you first mentioned. One, is there mismanagement at higher levels? And I, for one, don't think that CEOs need to make quite as much money as they have made. And when we put our bottom line in saying we've got to return the highest return to our shareholders, we cut consumers out of that deal. And I think that's part of the problem here. The other part of the problem is that we are doing virtually nothing to look towards alternative energy sources and to regulate our own consumption of energy, especially dirty energy here in Arizona. We have got to start looking at other ways to engage in clean energy fuel systems.
How we take 10 seconds.
Okay, one more thought. APS needs to do more to encourage people to use off-peak. We wouldn't need to build more power plants. The price differential for the on and off-peak for their time of day isn't sufficient. If you tell people we will give you a big break for using your power in the middle of the night, people will do that. We won't need more power plants.
The other thing that people can do is do something. We just passed a law to make this easier, is put solar panels on your home. You can actually sell power back to the grid when you're using solar panels that you can install in your own home. We just passed legislation to make it easier for people to do that.
Thanks so much, Kirsten, for doing that. But the reality is that we've got 5 people in the state controlling power for everybody. And most people cannot afford solar panels on their homes. So the idea here is to really allow more companies and more different alternative sources to come into the state without having to get a nod from the state legislature.
All right, got to take a quick break. When we come back, the panel's final thoughts. Stay with us. Welcome back, everybody. Boy, I wish you could hear the chatter during the commercials. I think we could do a 2-hour show with you 3 here today. This has been a good one. All right, final thought time. Darcy, lead us off.
Saving money for college has just gotten easier in Arizona. New accounts called 529s let Arizonans save money for college tax-free, a kind of 401k plan for college. Parents can put away up to $1,500 a year, so if you start early, that could mean almost $30,000 for college. This important tax relief means big savings for families and more diplomas for Arizona students.
Okay, Howie.